So today's video is going to be about the age-old question that everyone is always asked: why aren't headphones more like light bulbs? Okay, so it's obviously a question that I don't think anyone has ever asked until now, quite possibly. But bear with me because this sort of comparison will make more sense as I go through this video and I talk about some of the things that I've been thinking about recently. And, this is going to be a bit off the cuff. We're going to go on a bit of a sort of very geeky adventure. But if you're watching this, and I would love to hear your comments at the end about what you think about what I'm talking about. And particularly if you're watching this live, please give me your comments and we'll sort of work through this together. So, as you know, I've been working on this little jar that I'm going to have some shrimp in or whatever. And because I get very obsessive about things, I've been thinking about how I'm going to light this jar. And I've been thinking about what kind of lighting would make the plants grow. So I did all this reading and I bought this sort of clip-on light that goes around the edge of the jar. And I don't know if you can see it. It's a bunch of LEDs, and then there are blue LEDs along the white LEDs. And I was looking at this thinking, why are there blue LEDs in the light? There's white ones, and then there's these extra blue ones, and I didn't really understand why it was that there was different colors in the LEDs. And I looked at other aquarium lights in the shop, and some of them are sort of red LEDs, and some of them are yellow and green and that sort of thing. So it set me on this whole path of reading about and learning about light and photosynthesis. Because it turns out that plants don't, when we look at a plant and we look at the plant and it's green, it's because the light that is reflected, the wavelength of light being reflected from the plant is predominantly in the green spectrum. And in fact, plants can't do much with green light. They don't use green light to photosynthesize. They reflect the green light back to us, and then we look at the plant and we go, oh, that's a green plant. And in fact, plants actually use red light and blue light predominantly in those wavelengths, around 460 nanometers for blue light to photosynthesize. And so when you look at horticulture, and when they grow plants, they tend to use predominantly magenta kind of colored lights. It's a mix of red and blue. Now, when we look at the sun and we see that the sun produces in daylight, it produces what we can kind of perceive as natural white light. That's light being produced across different wavelengths of light in more or less equal amounts. And when we create an artificial light, like say a fluorescent light, it's not like sunlight. So for instance, a fluorescent light will have huge peaks in the specific green wavelength and the red wavelength and the blue wavelength of light, but it might have all these kind of dips and troughs in the overall spectrum. And it might look white to us, but when we put a object under the lamp, like say this handsome Neko Atsume mug, some colors will be brighter than others. It'll be more vivid than others because the light coming out of the light will have sort of these peaks and troughs in it. So why is this like a headphone? Well, in headphones, or in audio products really, we have a similar sort of thing where a given audio product will produce different frequencies. And it will produce them sometimes with peaks and valleys in the frequency response. And if you look at frequency response graphs for headphones, you'll see that they're not even sort of monitor headphones that we conceive as flat are really completely flat. They have peaks and troughs. The problem is, let's say that we take it as a given because, we had that discussion last week about objectivity and subjectivity and that kind of thing. But let's take it as a given that what we really want from a headphone is that it accurately reproduces all frequencies in equal amounts compared to the sensitivity of our hearing. Okay, so we don't want peaks and troughs. In fact, we want it to more or less match the sensitivity of our ears at different wavelengths, or I guess, yeah, different frequencies. And the problem is that we don't actually have any metrics, or we don't have any way for consumers to really easily tell whether or not a given audio product actually reproduces all frequencies in relatively equal amounts. When we look at headphones, the way we're marketed headphones, we're told, you want a headphone that's going to give you the music as the artist intended to hear. But basically, when you look at a headphone, you basically have to take them for their word, because all they have on the box is just a frequency response number, which I'll get into in a moment. But that's basically useless. Now, let's go back to what they do with lights. So it turns out with lights, they have a number called an index called the CRI, and that's a color rendering index. And the color rendering index is a number based on a mathematical formula. Do not ask me to explain the formula, and I know that there are limitations to the formula, but it's based on mathematics, which say how close is this kind of light compared to daylight in terms of faithfully rendering all the different wavelengths and all the different colors across the entire visible spectrum of light. And the higher that number is, the closer it is to reflecting light in a sort of natural, accurate way. With light bulbs, with the CRI, it's just like with pro headphones, right? A lot of average consumers are not going to care about the accuracy of the headphone that much. But for light bulbs, you want a high CRI, or there are some other metrics besides CRI to compensate for the shortcomings of the CRI metric. But there are other metrics, because in some applications, for instance, neonatal care, where you kind of need to see what color the baby is, I suppose. I think that's why it's important. But for things like any sort of color critical application, like cinematography, videography, that sort of thing, it's really critical to have consistent lighting. So you want a good metric for the accuracy of the light, or you can anticipate how a given fabric or maybe a costume or something will look under a given light source. So you want to have controlled professional lighting. And in the same way, it's the same sort of issue with monitoring headphones, where you go, I want a headphone that's actually gonna accurately reflect different frequencies in roughly equal amounts. With headphones, we do not have any sort of metric for a consumer to be able to look at this and go, there's, say, an ARI that we can say this headphone is actually relatively close to accurate compared to how we respond to different frequencies of sound. Instead, all we have is the frequency response number. So for this one, it says 10 hertz to 40 kilohertz. The average consumer, they walk into a store, they go to the salesperson and they say, what's a good headphone? And the salesperson will say to them, well, this one has a frequency response that goes from 10 to 40 kilohertz, and it makes it high resolution audio, and that makes it good. And it's really a crappy way to do things. There's a huge debate about whether we can actually hear anything over 20 kilohertz or anything below 20 hertz. This would be like if you had a light bulb and you went, well, we need to market this light bulb's ability. So what we're going to do is we're going to say it produces light in the ultraviolet spectrum, which no one can see. But, because that number is bigger, it's better. We've only educated consumers to really look at a bunch of meaningless numbers, including the frequency response number from 10 to 40 kilohertz, for instance, on this one. And the byproduct of that has been, well, the manufacturers need to to be able to tell people really clearly, hey, this product is better. Well, because these numbers are bigger, and let's put a badge on that and we'll make it gold and black, and that's called high resolution audio. And that means that the numbers are really big. Like, it's like adding extra razor blades, it doesn't stop at 20 now, it stops at 40, amazing. But if your kind of aim was fidelity of sound, wouldn't it be better to have an index which meant that the higher this number, this say ARI, the closer it was to accurately reflecting the entire spectrum of sound in a proportionate, equal way. And there are sort of companies that do this, right? There's Etymotic, and they actually have an in-house target curve for what they think is the average sensitivity of a human ear, and then they rate their headphones against that curve, and they give you an accuracy number to say that we're as close, like there, I think it's 92%. They're 92% close to matching their own internal target. But this target isn't an industry standard. It's pretty much a thing that only Etymotic uses, and it's sort of proprietary to them. So you can't compare that accuracy figure. No other company publishes a sort of accuracy rating for their headphones. We don't know. We don't have any metrics. And so we're forced to rely on either marketing statements like, hey, this is a monitor headphone, it's flat or whatever, or first to sort of rely on sort of frequency responses that, people reproducing frequency response graphs, for instance, the great work that Tile does over at Inner Fidelity. But at the end of the day, this is not as simple, I think, as it could be. And I know that there are arguments against reducing everything to a single number, just like the way you get a frequency response number. If you reduced everything to, say, this ARI, and then you would have this issue where even with the CRI on a light bulb, the CRI it's not the be-all and end-all. But it's at least much better than what we do for headphones today, which is basically to publish a bunch of meaningless numbers that no one really knows anything about, that you can't infer anything about the sound of a headphone from the number 10 to 40 kilohertz. It's not, it's not marketed clearly in the same way that a light bulb does. Now, Visionary brings up this. This would work well as a pro audio metric for raw accuracy, less so for commercial tunings. And that's a very, very good question. And I was sort of hoping that someone was going to bring this up in the live comments. So what Visionary is saying is that, well, if you put a number on the ARI and everyone wants to target the ARI, then you're going to end up with everyone trying to get a neutral, balanced sound, an accurate sound. But some people like a more warm sound, or some people like a more cold sound. But the funny thing is, light bulbs already have this handled. Because if you look at a light bulb, you see different light bulbs that are sold. Some are warm white, some are cool white, and the CRI figure from a light bulb is actually not directly related to the color temperature of the light bulb. Because you can have a high CRI light bulb. A Philips Hue, for instance, can have a CRI of 90, and you compare it to another light bulb with a CRI of 90, and they might not be the same color at all. So a warm white light bulb can have a similar CRI to a cool white light bulb. But the great thing about the whole cool white and warm white thing is that I can look at light bulbs and I can say, hey, I actually prefer warm white. All the lights that I have around my room are warm white light bulbs. I don't like looking at cool white light bulbs because I think that they look antiseptic. They look really cold and white. So, I'm more comfortable with warm white. But I still want a warmish sounding headphone which doesn't have any sort of weird peaks and troughs. I think it would be better if the frequency response was smooth, but maybe it was tilted more towards the bass or more towards the treble. And in the same way that, for instance, Etymotic advertises the XR and the SR as having the same accuracy rating, despite the fact that the XR actually has more bass. Now, again, I don't know how the mathematics of these indexes work, and if you're watching this and you're very smart, I'm sure you're going to be able to educate me on exactly how you calculate these indexes. So Jack has an amazing comment. I think we need to establish who defines the standard first. I am sure that there are industry consortiums to rally around a common standard, and it's entirely possible for the manufacturers to do it when they perceive that it is in their interests. For instance, with the high-res audio certification, which is actually done out of, I believe, some sort of listening lab in Japan, something like that. So what we kind of want, what I'm talking about with sort of like an ARI, is that you need the manufacturers to settle around a particular target sensitivity curve for human hearing. And of course, it's going to be averaged in the same way that it's going to be averaged in terms of human sight perception, and the perceptual quality of hearing at different wavelengths. So it's not going to, obviously it's not going to be perfect. If you have a single number, it's not going to be perfect. As much as I hate reducing things to numbers, and I don't do numerical reviews for the same reason, it would be great if we had a number that would actually have any sort of relevance to the accuracy or the accuracy of the headphone. Again, if you take it as a given that accurate sound reproduction is the goal of a headphone, which I know is arguable and I'm not making that video today, but if you take it as a given that what you actually want is an accurate, true-to-life sound, then why aren't any of these numbers actually helpful to consumers to figure that out? Again, I'm just throwing this out there. Like, this is something random that I'm saying that I've been thinking after playing around with all these light bulbs and just thinking, hey, I'm going to put this out there, and I want to know what your response is. So tell me why you think that this is a good idea or not a good idea, but help me answer the question, why aren't headphones more like light bulbs?